Good morning, good evening, good afternoon from wherever you are joining us. Thank you for coming to the January session of the Power Platform Connectors Integrations Lab Call. I see a lot of new faces here, so thank you all for showing up. We have a great session. This session will be recorded and posted online as well in case you want to share it with others, rewatch it. Quick introduction of myself for all of the new faces. My name is Jocelyn. I'm originally from the East Coast, as I was just telling Frank before the session started. I was born in New York and I grew up in New Jersey. I'm a University of Washington, Seattle alumni with a little bit of a non-traditional background to be working in a tech space. I have a major in mechanical engineering and a minor in Spanish. Before working in the connector space, I used to work on cloud flows as part of the Maker Experience team. Some of the features that I've worked on you might be familiar with. I worked on the delay button and as well as the undo button. And I also, way back yonder, used to work on the UI flows PPAC integration. Just a quick overview of the connector space for anyone who may be unfamiliar or new to the area. Power Platform Connectors spans 3 separate products. We are part of Power Apps, Power Automate, as well as Azure Logic Apps. There are a couple types of connectors to be familiar with. The first is custom connectors, which are made with custom code and are able to be deployed within a specific environment. These are different than what we call our certified connectors, which span 3 different types. First is first-party connectors. These are based off of Microsoft-owned APIs and are created by Microsoft internals ourselves. When you think of first-party connectors, think of the big boys like SharePoint, Office, Outlook, those guys. Then you have third-party verified publisher connectors. These are made by external API owners. A lot of these are some pretty large name companies like DocuSign and Adobe, and they're building connectors off of APIs that they own themselves. And last, we have our independent publisher connectors. These are also externals, predominantly made by community members who do not actually own the API that they are leveraging, but are leveraging open source code. So we actually have András, who is one of our independent publishers that are going to be demoing the Google Books connector that he has made later on in our session. Super excited to be sharing that with you guys. And just to give a little bit more proportion into the size of our ecosystem, we recently crossed the 900 total connector threshold. Super excited to have announced that in December. And we are on the road for hitting 1,000 by end of fiscal year, so the June-July timeframe of 2023. Just compared to the last time that we had spoken, I'm pretty pleased with the fact that we still actually had a little bit of growth in the last month over the holiday season. A lot of teams are like, oh, we were able to deploy a lot more because of holiday deployment freezes, but we still have a good quantity more since the last time we spoke a month ago. The overall ecosystem of 912 is broken down into about a quarter and a quarter each of first-party and independent publisher connectors, and then about half, 463, made by verified publishers. And next, I put together this little slide. You guys may have seen it if you're part of PNP, but just a quick recap of 2022, specifically with regards to the independent publisher community, because the efforts that you guys put in are really, really important to us. I would like to give some thanks to our top publishers, meaning the community members that have published the largest quantity of connectors with us for 2022. Troy, Paul, Tomas, András, and Roy, and I'm pretty sure some of you guys are actually here today, so thank you so much for coming. I also want to share our top connectors, and by top connectors made by the community, not distinctly talking about Mao here, I'm talking about how many people ask me for these connectors. I'm talking about how many salesmen are pinging me on Teams saying, oh, my customer is waiting for this connector, do we have it yet? So I'm super thrilled that we have some of these huge name connectors leveraging really important APIs and for really important companies being made by community members using open source code. Snowflake, OpenAI, GitHub Gist, Google Books, which we have the demo for today, and eBay. Across 2022, we have 49 new publishers that have joined our community, and they've made 171 new connectors. So thank you so much for that. Now, to jump into our first educational session of the day, I am really excited to announce Nathan Helgren, Senior PM from Dataverse, as well as Frank Lawn, Senior PM for Power Apps. For this awesome, really new, I think you guys just announced it like yesterday or earlier this week, about creating virtual tables in minutes inside of the Maker portal. So excited to have you guys here. I'm going to stop screen sharing and take it away when you're ready.
All right, thanks a lot, Jocelyn. We're really happy to be here and can't wait to show you folks more information about this. So, Frank, did you want to kick us off?
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. Hey, everybody. Good morning. Jocelyn, thanks again for having us here. I'm Frank Land. I'm a PM in Maker Portal for Power Apps. So basically, that's when you go to make.powerapps. We're looking at those interactions. I work really closely hand in hand with Nathan on Dataverse experiences for our makers. So making the table hub, table designer, all of these things better for makers. I'm going to be talking about virtual tables in the new creation wizard that we have in the Maker portal. Nathan, if you wouldn't mind going to that slide on what is Dataverse. Great. And so what are virtual tables? This is a way of creating Dataverse tables from data that isn't stored in Dataverse. We can actually connect to external data sources like SQL and SharePoint, grab that data, use it in memory, and represent that data in Dataverse. So let's use an example. Let's say you have a list in SharePoint that your team members are using to enter information every day. You can actually use that data in a virtual table without migrating that data over from SharePoint. Right? Because presumably everybody is going to that list and entering that information. You don't want to just move it to Dataverse. But now you can actually use Dataverse to represent that data virtually. Here's some of the features. We can integrate that data once you make it a virtual table with other tables in Dataverse using relationships. The data is actually accessed through metadata, so you're not using meaningful storage space. You're saving on space. And the other great thing is virtual tables allow for CRUD operations. That's create, read, update, delete, if the source allows it. So it's keeping these tables in sync between the source and between Dataverse. You can think about how you might want to use this. We've heard a lot, for example, folks who use model-driven apps today. Model-driven apps are built off of Dataverse tables. So it's not very easy to use data that's stored in SQL or SharePoint. Some people are doing that by jumping through a couple of hoops. They're integrating with Power Automate, for instance. Now with virtual tables, once you create a virtual table from your source, you do not need to do additional steps in your integration. So that's a very brief overview, and we can go into other details later. But let me hand it to Nathan to talk about the history.
Sure. And just before I jump into this for a moment, I wanted to throw in just one other piece of information. So since this team is very familiar with connectors and the use of connectors, sometimes what we'll hear from people is, well, why don't I just use a direct connector instead of a virtual table? And kind of one of the things that Frank talked about a moment ago is one of the key benefits is easy integration between data sources. So when you have a direct connection to SharePoint or SQL, you're pulling the data from SharePoint or SQL, and that's what you can do with it. But with a virtual table, you're easily able to make relationships between different tables and Dataverse. So you could have a single table in Dataverse that integrates data from both SharePoint and SQL into a single table by using the virtual connector providers that we have. And that's kind of the difference here that we have with the virtual creation experience that I'm about to talk about. So before we created virtual connector providers, and I like to call this the before times, this was pre-October 2021, anybody who was going to build a virtual table had to write code. You had to basically write plugins for every single operation you wanted to do, and you had to connect the Dataverse API to the API on the source. There was so many clicks in the process. It was a long, arduous process. You had to register things with Azure, and it could take days to weeks to get your virtual table to work. And that's actually what people do today for all their manual created or custom created connections for virtual tables as well. About a few months ago, well, maybe closer to almost a year ago to a few months ago, we had virtual connector providers launch. So this difference between a virtual connector provider and a standard connector is that we do a lot of the work for you. So we handle all that plugin creation, we handle all the registration, we do a lot of that background work. So that way, when you're connecting to something that has a virtual connector provider, you don't have to take all the additional steps in order to build the virtual table. Right now, we have SharePoint and SQL available as part of our newest functionality. Excel also uses a virtual connector provider. But when we released this functionality between October 2021 and May of 2022, we made some changes. Number one, no more code needed. So you're able to do this without building your plugins. We removed the clicks down to about 40 clicks. So before you had to do all the coding, now you had about like 40 different clicks across 6 different pages, including the admin center to build these. You still do an Azure registration, but if, like Batman, if you were prepared, you were able to do this in 15 minutes. So instead of days or weeks, you could build a virtual connection to SQL or SharePoint or Excel in about 15 minutes. And that made that a lot easier and a lot faster. So now we have what we just released, and it went into production last Friday. It is announced in our blog and other information yesterday, which is the new user experience. So Frank's team and my team got together to make the experience even better. So we had the 15-minute experience. We wanted to make that faster. We wanted to make that cleaner. And so again, it's still no code, but now you can build a virtual table in as few as 10 clicks. You've got a single wizard, so you're not going to multiple different places. You can customize your table and column names, which you couldn't do before, and you can build this virtual table in about 2.5 minutes. So, going from weeks of work to 2.5 minutes is a big leap. Excel will be coming shortly for this, so SQL and SharePoint are in public preview right now. Excel is going to be coming up shortly, and then later we're going to be adding additional enhancements to the experience. So 2 other things to note here before I jump into a demo is 2 other things that you couldn't use the SQL virtual table connections for easily that you can do with our new experience is you can connect to SQL views as well. So you're able to build a virtual table directly to a SQL view, which is a read-only, of course, you don't have full CRUD. And you're also able to build a virtual table that connects to SQL Synapse analytical tables. So if you've done any experimenting or any work with using SQL Synapse to take data lake data into SQL to represent it as a table, you can build a virtual table against that. So now you have a virtual table talking to a SQL virtual table that pulls out of a data lake. And so it kind of improves that process as well to make it easier to use that data within apps. So I'm going to jump into a demo here. And so this is my Dataverse environment connected to Power Apps. And so what I have is a list in SharePoint. So I'm doing a SharePoint list. I've got a list of all my customers and that I use for my company. And people access this all the time and make changes and edit it. Not all those people have Power Apps access, so I need to keep the SharePoint site active. So what I want to do is I want to build a virtual table. I'm going to go from tables to build this. You can also do it directly from a solution. But from tables, you'll see now when you click New Table, you'll have an option to build a table from external data. So this means something that's not part of the relational data of Dataverse. So when I click this, we get a nice little wizard that appears. And the 2 options that we have, of course, are SharePoint and SQL, as we mentioned. Later, Excel will be here. If you still need to do the process of going through a manual process to build a custom, we have a link that takes you to the process information on how to do a custom creation. But this wizard specifically is just for virtual connector providers. I can pick my SharePoint connection. You could also, if you don't have one already created, you'll have a prompt to create a new connection. One thing I want to call out here is you can choose to manually configure your connection reference. So for example, if I'm using SharePoint, click next. I can tell it to use an existing connection reference if I have one in existence, or I can create a new one. The only benefit here really is you're naming it. So the connection reference, we go through the process of actually creating it for you, all the steps. We just give you the option to give it a friendly name. So if you wanted to give it a more easily recognizable name so you can manage that as part of your ALM, then you can come here and do that. If you choose not to do that though, and you take that checkbox away, it's just going to generate an automatic name for you. So the next step, I click, and because I'm doing SharePoint, it wants me to either paste my SharePoint URL or through Graph, it's going to pull all of the recently accessed SharePoint sites that I have based on my AAD. So I'm going to find the one I want to use here and just click it. And then the next thing it's going to do is it's going to look at that and show me all the lists I have access to. So here are all of my lists on this site. And so I want to be able to do my master list for customers and resellers. And then I have an option here. I want to configure my tables or columns. If I don't care what the tables and column names are, I can turn this off and it saves me a step, but I want to show you the screen. So click next, and it's going to go back and retrieve all of the details about my list to show me what it's going to look like when it goes into Dataverse. So here I have the name, the plural name, the schema name. So I can change any one of those at this point. I can go to the primary field. I can pick any one of my text fields as my primary field. And then I also have a list of these are all the columns that are going to appear. So these are the columns as they're named in SharePoint. Then it gives me what it thinks the display name is and the schema name. So you'll notice here that for the display name, it's calling this customer email, but the column's name field one. That's because in SharePoint, it was called field one, and they just put a label on top of it called customer email. So it assumes that's what you want the display name to be. But the schema name, it's just pulling exactly from the schema name. So I can make any changes here that I'd like to make. Another option you have is quick format, and this really is kind of implements some changes that if you're using SQL and it has a prefix at the beginning of it, it'll go and clean up some of these. I don't know if it's going to do anything here for SharePoint. Let's see. Yeah, it didn't make any suggested changes, but just for the purpose of this, I'm going to change one of these so you can see that it makes the change. And then I click next. And now it's going to show me the set. So I'm coming from SharePoint. This is the list I'm using. I'm going to Dataverse. This is the naming I'm using, how many columns I'm moving over, what my primary column is. If I'm great, I can click Finish. If not, I can click either one of these to go back steps and make modifications. So if I skipped that naming process and I look here and I don't like the primary column that was picked, I can go back to the configuration page and go ahead and make modifications before I move forward. So from here, I click Finish. And now it's creating my virtual table. Ironically, this is the longest part of the process. And even though we went from 15 minutes or 2 weeks down to 2.5 minutes, it seems like this takes a lot of time because we just click through a bunch of screens really fast. We are working on performance enhancements on this, but realistically, this does take very little time, maybe a minute to 90 seconds typically for the creation process. And as soon as it's done creating, it's going to drop me directly into my virtual table, and I'll be able to see my data and manipulate that. So you can see that here in just 1 second. So while this is finishing up, I'll open it up to 1 or 2 questions before I finish up the demo. And I don't, oh, go ahead, yes, please.
Yeah, you got a additional question on providing additional connection sources from Nick. It's in the chat.
All right. So, and let's see, I don't have the, let me change my view here so I can see it. Let's see. It's involved providing additional connection sources. Okay, so right now, the ability to build virtual connector providers is only internal. However, we are investigating some other possibilities. Number one is we're expanding looking to expand our offerings beyond SQL, SharePoint, and Excel. But also there has been requests, and we are considering the ability of making the ability to build these virtual connector providers open to ISVs as well. So it's some investigation discussion we're having. I can't give you a timeline because we're still in the discussion phase, but it is something that we have heard requests for and are considering as well. Because if other folks could make these for us and make this a much wider opportunity for everybody to do this quickly, it only benefits everyone. So we just have to look into kind of what the limitations may be. So that is something we're considering, Nick, and maybe we'll have more information for you in the future.
Oh, thank you, Nathan.
So as you see here, I have got my table. I got my data in it already, so I can go here and just say, hey, I want to show some more of my data here. And I'm connected directly to my virtual table in SharePoint. So this is all of my data. And even here, so now I'm connected, I can go make a modification. So let's see, I'm going to pick Andrea. So I'll make sure I know who she is next time. And come on. Oh, it's not a demo if something doesn't go wrong. All right, for right now, I'm just going to change this. I will change this to Colorado just for purposes of this. And it's going to save. And then when I jump back over to my list here, so I've got Andrea, who's in Washington. And when I refresh this, my list shows, oh, it's probably still saving. Oh, there we go. So it changed. So Andrea is now from Colorado. So you can see that the data I'm pulling is directly from the virtual table. It's a full connection. I can build apps on this. I can do everything else I want with this. Has full connectivity. And now I can drop this into any app I want. I can link it to any Dataverse table I want. It's ready for use. And so that's as quickly and easily as you can make any of these virtual tables using this new experience. So now I'd like to turn it over to Frank, who'd also like to do a quick demo.
Yeah, that's awesome, Nathan. Thank you for showing us that. I'm going to do a quick demo here on SQL. So I'm going to share my screen. In fact, I'm just going to share my whole desktop here. Okay, so folks should be able to see a split screen here between my SQL SSMS and the virtual table wizard on the right. So I'm looking at just a SQL database here, and I'm interested in bringing this table sales LT schema, sales order details, over to my Dataverse environment. And here are the columns there. So we'll walk through a very similar process that Nathan was showing. Just going to go ahead and connect to that server. And now I'm going to look for this. Okay, so we've got this table here. Let's go next. Very similar. We're going to look at the config screen. Give that a moment. All right. So my columns are coming through. As folks can see, sales order ID, order detail ID. It's all here. As Nathan mentioned before, when you're using SQL, you're coming into here with a lot of schema. If folks don't want that, we can take that away with a quick format of names. So you can see how that's changed. I'm going to hit next. It's going to do a quick review. We're going to verify, yep, this is the server and database. I'm coming through and I'm pulling in these fields. Let's go ahead and finish. Play the waiting game a little bit. All right. While we're waiting for that, I'll just show another table that I had set up previously.
There it is.
Did it come back?
Oh, sorry. I thought you switched before. Okay.
Oh, yeah, I switched a little bit. I knew we were going to have to wait for a little. So here's another table that I had pulled just right before the call. So this is a slightly different table, sales order header, which is down here. But I wanted to show people this. Here we go. Okay, so we're pulling our columns. It's going to start displaying the top rows here. And we've got our data, just like what Nathan was showing with the SharePoint situation. Okay, I'm coming back to sales order. We have that here as well. I'm just going to show everything. Here we go. All right, there we are. So that's the quick demo live of how SQL works. I wanted to talk about this SharePoint situation, or excuse me, this SQL Synapse situation. Nathan, would you mind sharing the deck again?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, because I know we had a question on this. So if we go to slide 10, yeah, there we go. So I'm just taking a couple of screenshots from my own Synapse environment. In Synapse, you can actually have external tables. So in this situation, my data engineer has some data that are stored on Parquet files, and we want to expose that in SQL. And so he's helping me to do that based on this construct in Synapse called external tables, which is essentially virtualizing that Parquet data inside SQL. And Nathan, next step, please. So for folks who are using SQL external tables with Synapse, they're able to connect to those external tables through SQL, just like what I've done. And then using the process that I just showed with SQL, you can actually connect directly to that data that you have in Synapse that was originally a Parquet file. Yeah, Nathan, if you just kind of scroll through the slides here, I'm going through the exact same process that I was showing of setting up the connection, picking the right table, and if you keep going, we're getting that data to come through. So Really, there's not a difference when you're doing this the SQL process for the SQL external tables from Synapse. All right, Nathan, back to you then.
Great, thanks. So I've got a couple Slido questions I'd like to pose to you. So based on the new experience we've done, I'd like you to use Slido. You can either go to slido.com and use the code, or you can use your QR reader. But we'd like to know how likely you are to use or try virtual tables based on the improved experience. So just take a moment here for you to jump in and give your thoughts. But yeah, so now some of you may or may not have had use for these in the past or tried them. So I'd just kind of like to get a sense of do these improvements make it something that's more attractive to you? So just give us another couple moments for folks to provide thoughts on that. I want to throw out one other piece of information that we didn't cover here while the Slido is being voted on, which is that another thing that we came out with last month, back in December, is the ability for users to use custom multi-table lookups or polymorphic lookups to include virtual tables in them. So in case you haven't seen the blog post on that, we mentioned that in our December blog post, and you can go ahead and start using that now, where if you build a custom polymorphic table lookup, you can have the lookup attached to virtual tables as well as local tables. And just give this another moment or two. Looks like we've have some folks that are on the likely or very likely side. Very cool. Some undecided. That's totally cool too.
Yeah, Nick, thank you for posting the link to Slido there in chat.
Oh, thank you very much. Yes, sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to help.
All right. And since you popped in the chat, I'll give it just another moment, and then we got one more Slido question after this, which is an open text. So the next question is, what do you feel is missing? So we just showed you how we made the experience easier for SQL and SharePoint, and reduced the time you needed, and gave you some new features. So is there anything that you feel is missing from this experience for us to consider as we continue to look to improve virtual tables and the creation experience? Nice. See a bunch of typing. I like that.
I didn't vote in the last question because I thought I would be biased.
Security model on virtual tables. Oh, good question. So right now, virtual tables are still organizational or organization owned. So we are reviewing other ways to handle security through token authentication. That is something that would be a future feature that we're investigating. I don't have a timeline for that, but we are aware that people have asked for additional security, even requesting can there be user owned or group owned. So there are investigations being done on virtual tables for there. Creation's cool, overall feature too. Many partners are asking a security model. Same question, I got that. Try it for myself before I can say what's missing. How do we provide feedback? Okay, so for feedback after attempting it a couple different ways, you can go on to the communities, you can go to ideas, you can just contact me or Frank directly with your feedback. You can go through one of the other various channels. You can use my LinkedIn. I'm totally open to any feedback on the functionality. If you don't see like a blog post or something that you want to comment on, you can just message me directly on LinkedIn with the feedback, and we can discuss it. Nice to know about the caching and expectations when data is available. Data is real time, so we don't cache it. It pulls fresh every time you access the table and do the refreshes. So nothing is cached, and so it's more secure. And we always have the most up-to-date data, so that way you're not have this experience where SharePoint might be more up-to-date than Dataverse. Required columns for SQL. The documentation online provides information on this, but you do have to have a GUID field for us to be, or an identifier that we can use as a GUID to be able to utilize that, and at least one text field to use as the primary name. Beyond that, there aren't any required fields. More sorting and filtering options. I'd like to hear more about that if you want to provide some more details. Maybe either in the chat here, or you can drop it into LinkedIn or something to get me some more information there. Documentation, yes, there's a blog post. Frank can drop that into the chat right now. We recently released the blog, which has online documentation updates as well as some videos. And will bidirectional ETL be available? I'm sorry, ETL? Could somebody define that for me?
Extract, transform, load.
That is something that we would have to evaluate separately. And so that is, let's talk about it separately. You can go ahead and send some messages with information. We can evaluate that. Can we use relationships using virtual tables? If you mean relationships between the actual tables, like from two SharePoint tables, if they're on the same connection reference, you can have a relationship between those tables. You can't relate the different virtual tables from different sources to each other, but you can go through a Dataverse table as a local table and have relationships that way. Would be a white paper be accessible for performance on scale? That's a good question. We don't have information on that at the moment. Let's talk offline to see what kind of information you're looking for. We are working on performance right now, just as a reference point, that overall table performance and virtual table performance is something that we're focusing on for sure. I want to make sure that I leave enough time for the next speaker. So thank you all. Please feel free to drop more stuff in the chat. We can review that later. And thank you so much for your time. And I'll turn it over to the next speaker.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nathan and Frank, for this session. This was clearly very valuable, and I'm so excited to see how many interested questions we had. This was really great engagement, and thank you guys so much. This was like a hot off the press update that we were, first to hear it here. Let me take over sharing screen again just to introduce our independent publisher demo of the day. I am super excited to have András joining us. András is a Dynamics 365 technical lead with Avanade, and he is going to be demoing the Google Books connector that he has made as a community member. András, feel free to take over screen sharing whenever you are ready.
Hello, yes, thank you very much for the introduction. I think I already took it over the screen.
I think you did too.
Okay, that's perfect. So, hello, hi all, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on the timelines. I'm András. I will be here with you for the coming, let's say, 10 minutes to do a bit of demo and introduction and overall explanation around all of this and how I got into this part through the Google Books in the Publisher connector. Before I begin, there will be just 2 slides or 3 for a bit of show and tell. I think it's going, yes. So, my name is Fördős András. It's a bit around other way around. It's last name, first name. In Hungary, we are a bit turnaround, and we are not using the normal English or British methodologies. I'm a technical consultant, as I have been already introduced at Avanade. I am currently residing in Malaga, Spain, south of Europe, mostly for the sunshine. I have been traveling around though various countries and living up many places. Don't worry, pronunciation is not really an issue. I mean, I have been switching a lot of countries in German-speaking, English-speaking, and now the Spanish-speaking parts. Pronunciations are always going crazy, so it's not an issue. I did see a lot of people have in community some type of title. Given this is my first, let's say, second community talk or presentation, I don't really have any kind of such thing, but many people say I'm the depends on guy or person. Given I use these 3 words to drive crazy all of the stakeholders or partners or team members I'm working with together, let it be if they are asking for advice, guidance, design, or anything. It depends on, that's the answer. And just a short part before I begin with the Google Books itself, about independent publisher connectors. I have been working so far with the list above or below, depending on your screen setup. I started getting into this probably not in the same way as many of the other ones. I didn't face straightforward challenge what I wanted to solve and then came up with a connector for that one, but rather I was interested. I was working on creating a customer data platform solution for one of our partners, and they were looking for enriching that data set about their customers, about their accounts, and it came very handy that we had connection API to the British government, checking and verifying VAT numbers. So that's how I connect to this part. Actually, at the moment, I started to work together with or submitted the connector straightforward to the connector gallery, managed by the great guys of Matt Beard and Thomas Sansor, I believe, who told me that there is actually this partner program going on with independent publisher, where I could also publish it and make it available for the overall community and, well, all the experts, low code, pro code, everybody who is using Power Platform solutions. So I did begin with this one. The British government, VAT and the word time connectors, they are fairly basic. They were really just to try out how it works, how the program works, what it does. After that came the Google Books, which I will demo and talk about a bit more later on. And the Pixel Encounter. The Pixel Encounter was a pet project. I did build my first Power-Ups Canvas application to create a pixelated screen, responsive one, to create, to show, display pixel animations, pixel art, create pixel art, whichever you feel like and want to do. And for that, the Pixel Encounter was a nice service, or is still a nice service. Basically random generating you monsters, pixelated monsters, what you can just get through their service, which you can later use for icons, logos, avatars. Literally the limits is the sky. After this, I turned rather back to the challenge part. Is not probably not normal path for the people is creating the exchange rate connector. Probably there is 2 or 3 different similar solutions already existing. I'm coming from the Dynamics world, where if you are using Dynamics 365 Sales, you need to, or you should, time to time updating your conversation rates for given currencies, which is not native out of the box. So for that, this solution is an answer, one of the answers at least. And then came the environmental or sustainability solutions, the IQR and Fishwatch. IQR is, if you are not familiar with the services, is providing a real-time up-to-date data about air pollution, air quality, based on location, regions, countries, and even GPS coordinates. While Fishwatch is one of the biggest one, I think, or the biggest, most up-to-date information system about popular seafood choices farmed or harvested within the United States or around, which is basically allowing you nutrition informations, farming, biological informations about the species. Really a lot of information there. And in the last days, I turned back to my usual background for ALM and operations with Swagger connector, language tool, and Postman to allowing, well, development work also, and hopefully seeing a bit of rise there for low-code automation and ALM processes. And if you want to look up also the LinkedIn or additional blog and whatnot, you can find me over here on this QR code. Later on, I assume in the recording it will be still visible. So Google Books itself, I assume there's not really the introduction, and apparently it was asked by a lot of partners so far. It is, I think, the biggest available or public database regarding any kind of publications. It's not just books, it's magazines, newsletters, ebooks also, publication, any kind of research publications, with one of the biggest killer feature of enabling you already from the start a full text search, meaning you are not just searching through the abstract, but you are capable of searching through all the body of text available in the database. And that is a very rapidly growing database, to be fair, given they are not just typing in or sometimes uploading documents and new publications, but they are continuously scanning also all their historical documents to extend their library of books. To start to work with it, you do need a Google account, which is free and which is very easy to register, or most probably all of us already has one. And it does provide loads of services or endpoints for us to work with, which can be categorized mostly into 3 main areas, out of which in the first version of the independent publisher connector, what I've submitted, is working with the first group, which is basically a public search feature. Either we can search through various volumes, books, through the database, or retrieve specific information for one single volume, for one single book or publication or magazine. The second group is, which probably will be the next extension for the connector also, if will be requested, we can collaborate, is enabling you to also not just search and go through the full database, but review or list other people's bookshelves, other people's collection of various books. And the third category is basically your own bookshelf. You can manage your own bookshelf. You can create various bookshelves, add specific volumes, remove, share, and basically have collections about technology, about ecological, sustainable farming, tomato planting, or whichever you feel like. So just a note here again, the current version of the connector is supporting just the first pack, basically the search feature, which is basically the biggest killer feature anyway of the service. but we can collaborate and reach out to me anytime if there is a need to bring in all the other or any of the other endpoints too. And enough about the talk. Let's then do a bit of demo. Before beginning there, just a quick review. There is also documentation uploaded or given for the independent publisher. I assume you're seeing right now my pull request on the Power Platform independent connector, if correct. Someone can confirm me, please.
I see your README.
Yes, that's perfect. So yes, there is some additional documentation there if needed, like how you can create a Google account or where you find API key, which is needed for the basic start, or what are the supported operations. Usually when I start to work with independent connectors or working even just custom connectors and not submitting anything up for certification, I start with looking around for documentation, for which actually Google is one of the best source because their documentation is very thorough and extensive on how the API works. After that comes the normal part of building actually connectors, so going through the downloading the Swagger or open API file if there is any. If known, then just connecting directly to the Maker portal, make.powers.com, creating the connector, then with the pack tool, command line tool, downloading and updating with additional missing descriptions, a bit of reviewing and modification around if user experience wise, it's better to have drop down values for some of the entry parameters or not. It's just a normal process. But here the important part is that Google actually is a very nice service to work with. There is an extensive documentation, not just for this API, but all of their other APIs too. And actually for the demo, as I mentioned, for the Google Books, same as for the Pixel Encounter, I had a personal motivation to build it or to work with it. For this one, it was Christmas coming. And before Christmas in my family and in the friends area, there is a lot of birthdays also happening, where usually books are exchanging hands or working around in between each other. And for this reason, I was asked by various, let's say also family members, also friends, to look for some Spanish books since I'm living now in Spain, which I can bring back and have as a gift for them. And given I'm working day to day, as probably most of us in Microsoft Teams and this ecosystem, I was thinking, well, it would be fairly much easier to bring in Google Books itself, just a search into my day-to-day work. Within half an hour or 1 hour, it was done. It's still a prototype, so don't take it apart, this kind of application. This is the second one, the Pixel Up was the first one, so no need to throw chairs. And basically, would come already the first question of why did I do it, even though I work with, or we are working with Microsoft Teams and a Power Platform community. One of the happiest things of using this connector is that actually it provides more access to the books library than googlebooks.com, the user interface of Google itself. I think the mobile application is a bit more handy for us, but the Google Books interface is not really allowing that much of a search parameters like the overall search authors, filters, language codes going through, like what you can access in the API. The same way, if I'm looking for a result, like I'm looking for a book for Tolkien, I get back, probably 10 results. I check one of them out. There is a bit of description, the title, the subtitle, the author. I can find more information under the link. It's a British one. Usually it's listed around $10. I can find more information. Actually, the retrieved information is also way more descriptive or contains way more details than what we can find on the googlebooks.com website. I assume that's by design. But in this way, basically, we have access to bigger part of, or a bigger amount of data on our hand. I could just click around and show around also the prototype itself. It's really basic, overall searching out or filtering for various solutions. But I assume anyway we are running out of time, and the main understanding is here just a part of we are capable of with a single search button doing complex queries, returning back the results, and work with the thumbnails, images, all the return information what we get back from the connection. And just as a final note, before then opening up for questions or handing back the word, it's really the most basic one of working with it in, for example, Canvas application or integrating Power Automate is just working with the Google Books in the Publisher connector, having the input as the search itself, and some additional parameters if needed, like the language restriction. I'm just interested in English or Spanish or Hungarian results, and some additional filter parameters. And I would say that's all. I would hand back or forward. I'm not sure where the direction.
Thank you so much. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Feel free to unmute.
I just say that's so cool. Thank you for showing us that.
Thank you very much.
This was really awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. We actually have Troy just shared that there's also a Lord of the Rings independent publisher connector as well. This goes hand in hand. I actually wanted to give a quick thanks. I'm not 100% sure. Is Keith still here? Question mark. Anyways, my point was I was actually seeing one of our attendees today, Keith, posting on LinkedIn about how awesome today's session was. So I just wanted to give thank you for sharing about our call here. And thank you so much to everyone for coming. We still have 9 minutes left, but that was the end of our planned session information. Feel free to stick around to ask me any questions. And if you like today's content, please share the forms link that you guys use to sign up. This is a non-NDA call. Everybody is welcome. So I'm looking forward to seeing you all again next month. This session always occurs the second Wednesday of every month, and we may actually be moving it earlier 1 hour. So that would be 7 a.m. Pacific time. I'm aware that most of you guys are ahead of me in time zone. So I hope that this works for everyone. But I'm looking forward to seeing you all, and please feel free to stick around and ask me any questions. Thank you so much to our presenters, Frank, Nathan, and Fördős for your contributions.
Thank you.
Thanks,
everyone.
Jocelyn.
Thanks, everybody. And thanks, Jocelyn, for letting us come in here and show off some stuff in your area.
Of course, it was a pleasure to have you guys share.